Hello again. So we're back for stage 3, the last stage of our site survey. So far, hopefully you've got some maps. You've got a map of soft structures on your site to go on your base map. You've got a map of water and what water's doing on the site. You've got one for sectors, that's the wind and the sun and so on. And microclimate, so where's it windy, where's it sunny, where's it frosty and so on. And then last week we looked at desire lines, so where are you moving around the site, where do you spend time, where do you not go very often. Zoning, which is related to desire lines. If you haven't done these, you need to look back at last week's. And also mapping your utilities. And so we've got 4 more things, 5 more technically to look at this week, but you'll need 4 more copies of your base map. So we're going to start with vegetation and fungi, because fungi are not plants. So looking at what vegetation there is on your site, and that's on all kinds of different levels. So we can look at a very basic level, like there's a tree and what kind of tree, and we've planted these trees so we know what they are. We've planted all of these trees. In fact, there wasn't a hedge here when we arrived. So these, we know what these are because we put them in the ground. And some of the things you might not know what they are, and particularly if you've just arrived, because the thing about plants is they pop up at different times of year. So if you arrive in May or June, like we did to one place where we lived, then we didn't see any of the spring flowers because they'd come up, they'd done their thing and they'd disappeared. So we had to wait till the following spring to see those. So while I'm saying observe vegetation and fungi, because again, they're seasonal this week, really it's just to start observing them this week, but it will be an ongoing process. In fact, all of our observations, some of which there will be more mysterious than others, like plants and such, we'll get to others in a moment, but to be continuing to observe those. So things like plants, we need to be observing for at least a whole year, but it doesn't mean that we can't start doing things. In permaculture, we talk about not doing anything big and substantial for at least a year. That's, don't build your house until you've observed your site for a year. But most of us already have a house. So much of what we might be doing, like planting some veg, what that will do is, if it's in the wrong place, then it's just going to give you some more information about your site. It will help you learn about microclimates, for instance, if you put something where it doesn't do quite so well. So start observing your vegetation. So again, the map's going to go up. I don't know how easy it is to see here. So this is our vegetation map, and it has some broad categories on there, just like lawn. So we're standing on the top lawn. And this was, when you first arrive and you walk around and you're looking broadly, it's like, well, there's grass there and there's grass there and there's another lawn over there. But what we realized was when we started to look at the fine details, so we arrived in August, September, and we got down and got close to the ground and started to look, we started to notice that actually this lawn here at the top, adjacent to the field behind us, was far more diverse than the other areas of grass. And we think that's probably down to the southwesterly winds come from here behind us, and that lots of seeds in the past have blown from that field before it was improved. In other words, all of these plants taken away, usually with herbicides and such, and that those seeds have blown onto the lawn here. And so this is actually quite a diverse area of grassland here, and something that in time, if we manage it well, we can retain that diversity. So have a look at what vegetation, and also keep your eye out for fungi as well when they appear, when their fruiting bodies appear later in the year. So now take your second map and start making a note of what animals you see on the site, and that's a very broad category. So that includes birds, fish, amphibians. It's February. There are lots of toads around the pond at the moment. So again, it's very seasonal. We don't see much of them at other times of year. We have bats here, but again, that's more spring and summer. We don't see so much in the winter. Squirrels, they're out and about most of the year actually, and some of these animals you don't get to see. So there's a molehill. We know there are moles here, but we haven't seen one because of course all that's going on below the ground. And some things of course are nocturnal, so if you have access to a trail camera like this one, then you can get a sense of what's going on when you're asleep. Of course this also records during the day, and that can also be useful. So start making a record of what you're seeing around the site, and again looking at what are their desire lines. So here's our animals map. So again, I'll stick that up on the screen so you can see it properly. Just making a note of where these kind of things are happening. And yes, molehills, the only molehills we find on site are up here at the top of the site, and that's because this is the only place where the soil is deep enough for moles to be active. Now, this brings us on nicely to the next thing that is very helpful to observe, which is the soil. Now, the soil very much relates to what plants will grow, but also here the depth of soil relates to what animals you might find here. We don't have rabbits here because there's just not enough soil. We're at the top of a hill. There's about a foot, 30 centimetres of soil at the most at any point on this site, and that's what you'll find on uphill sites, because over many years the soil has gradually washed down the hill. So in the valleys there'll be deep soils, but they'll often be wet and waterlogged depending on where you are, and uphill we're drier but the soils are less deep. And the soil here is very nice. In fact, I'm not going to get into how to test different kinds of soil, and there's plenty of places you can find that on the internet. But essentially you've got three main types. You've got sandy soil, you've got clay soils, and hopefully it'll be obvious what they feel like to you. And then the third type is called silt. Now, silt is less familiar to most people, but it has a sort of slippery, buttery feel to it. And when you squeeze clay, it has some resistance. With sort of clay with some moisture in it, it has a resistance to it, whereas silt just kind of moves very freely because there's no stickiness between the particles. Like clay particles stick together, and so to deform a ball of clay there's resistance, whereas with silt they just slide. And so we actually have a silt loam soil, and there's various different soil tests you can do for this, but again this is not really what I'm here to do. What you ideally do is to find out a little bit about the soil that you have, and you can test that by filling it with your hands or putting it into a jar, shaking it up with some water. Obviously get all the bugs out first, and see how it settles out, and you'll find the sand sinks to the bottom first. So you have sand at the bottom, silt in the middle, clay on the top, and you get a sense of the different proportions, and that will affect what you can do with your land. But any kind of soil is okay. It's harder to change the texture of soil, which is about the mineral, the particle size, the clay, silt, sand part, than it is to add organic matter and improve soil by feeding the life in the soil. Because by feeding the life in the soil, we're feeding the microbes which feed the worms, ultimately which feed the moles, and then you get lots of life. So soil, yes. And rather than making a separate soil map, you could just put soil sampling sites onto your vegetation map. We've got a separate map for our soil sampling sites, simply because we've also included the depth on the map, but primarily because we've just taken lots of different samples in different places. And these charts that I've got here, this is actually the top lawn here, and you can see how much more diverse the plant life is here because I've got plant diversity on my map as well here. So the last two things we'll be surveying are related but opposite. So the first thing I want you to think about, to use your third map for, is to look at views and make a note of any good views that you have, perhaps any bad views. Now obviously this is a good view, although it is out to the east, so that's where the cold winds come from in the winter, and why one of the things we've had to do here is to think about wind breaks. But anyway, for now we're just recording what we see. So what good views do you have? I'm just going to put up our map here, because as usual it's going to be easier than seeing it here. but we have many views out of different windows and from the land out in different directions, and we want to make sure that we're not blocking those and taking them away. So what's the opposite of a view? Well, somebody else's view of you. So that's places that are overlooked by neighbours, perhaps. You may be unfortunate that every part of your garden, for instance, is overlooked, but you may have some areas that are more private than others. So what we've done, because there are certainly some areas overlooked broadly, but from land, neighbours' land, rather than a neighbouring house, as you can see up in the top corner here. And so it's easier for us to map the areas that are overlooked than the areas that are private, but it may be just that you have a few small areas that are private and it's easier to just put those on your map. So create your map however you like. Here it is again, so you can have a proper look at it. Now that kind of concludes the survey, but it's something to continue to do on an ongoing basis. But next week we shall start doing our analysis, and so get your maps together and join me next weekend and we'll get on to the next stage.